Data modelling. Have you ever struggled with a data set that has multiple date fields and you need to do calculations between them? Watch this video and find out a top tip on how to use alias tables. Hi everyone, it's Matt Pepper here. This is something that has come up several times in the last few weeks within the UK, and I thought it was worth sharing. If you have a spreadsheet of data extracted from a CRM system or from a project management system, or you have a database table that's been built for something like Tableau, which is incredibly wide and has just everything dumped into it, it can cause some problems if you don't know how to use alias tables correctly. The business use case that we are going to cover today is that of a project management tool. We've got a data extract which has project ID and multiple dates within it, and what we want to be able to do is answer the following question. How many projects were forecast to launch and how many were actually launched within August 2019? The key issue with this is being able to have one generic lookup table that can join to two columns within the same fact table. Does that sound confusing? We better get on with the demo. This is the data that we'll be looking at in the demo. There is project ID, there's project manager ID, there's forecast launch, and then there's actual launch. What we're trying to do in the query is actually filter based on forecast launch for 2019 August. So we do a quick count of that, and there's the answer. Notice though that column I has got nothing in it at the moment. So then what we have to do is do another count of the projects that actually launched within 2019 of August. And as you can see, the number is slightly different. That's how you do it in Excel. But how can you do that within MicroStrategy? There are two other data files I'll be bringing in. There'll be a lookup table for project manager against project manager ID and a date lookup. This is the generic date lookup we will be using to do our calculations. So first I'm going to add the external data that we've seen. That is the project data. So we'll have the fact table, which is project data. It will have the lookup for project manager and the date lookup as well. I'm just going to remove the erroneous attributes for this demonstration. And the same with the budget and spend, I don't need those. Now I want to link my facts table to my date lookup, so I'm going to first of all link actual launch. Now I want to add forecast launch to the same lookup. This is when the problems start arising because date lookup is already being mapped to actual launch, so it can't be linked to forecast launch on the same fact table. Before I show you the solution, I'm going to just tidy up the lookup table for date. Now I'm going to not import forecast launch on this table, and I'm going to rename this actual launch. We're going to use the information in this table just for counting actual launch. I'm then going to bring in the same fact table, and this is going to create a copy or alias of the fact table that we can use in our logical table model. I'm going to remove all of the objects that I don't need to import, including actual launch date. This alias table is going to be focused on forecast launch date. So now I'm going to rename forecast launch date to date, which will then map it to our generic date lookup table, just as we had done previously with the actual launch date. I've now got one table, one fact, which is pointed at actual launch, and an alias table, as it's called, for forecast launch. And I'm just going to map project manager, and I'm doing this as a lookup table as well, because there might be some project managers that have got actual launches and not forecast launches. So therefore that means we get an outer join from both those two tables. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove the row counts for LU date and LUPM, because I won't need those. And then for the other two row counts, I'm actually going to name those actual launch, or number of actual launch, and the number of forecast launch. And we'll use those two row counts as our counts on the actual data. And then I'm just going to create a derived metric, which is the total number of projects. With the date lookup, I'm now going to drag in the year that we've got and then select 2019. And then I can put in the project managers, the actual, the forecast, and the total projects. Let's just put some subtitles and sort the grid. And I can drag in month into the filter and make sure that year is targeting month. And we can see now that there are the correct calculations that we saw within the spreadsheet. So now we've seen MTDI. I'm now going to show you Schema. Slightly different, but ultimately the same principle. I'm now logged into Developer, and I've logged into the warehouse catalog and found project data. This is exactly the same spreadsheet that we saw earlier, the same fact, and I've just imported it into SQL Server so we can see as a schema. I also have a generic time lookup as well as a generic project manager lookup table. If you look into the actual tables part, what you'll see though is I have got three tables called project data, but slightly different names. The warehouse table itself, the physical table, is called project data. And that first one is mapped to actual date. There's a fact for that. An alias table is simply a duplicate of a logical table with a different name. What this does is reduces the number of physical tables you need in your data warehouse. You can then duplicate a fact table and then use one generic lookup to join to two separate columns from the same physical table. To create a table alias, you just right click and create table alias and then rename it slightly. The second table here has actually got a fact, which is the count of forecast date. And the third one is a count for project for the lookup, so we're going to actually count the number of project IDs in each table. The first fact is the count of project ID based on the first alias table, which is actual launch date. The second fact is a count of project ID based upon the second alias table, which is the forecast launch date. We'll create a count of each of those as metrics. And finally, we look into the report. So luckily the numbers are exactly the same for 2019 of August, where we have the 7 and 10, which has been across all of them. Looking at the tables that are accessed, you can see there are three lookup tables, that is project manager, date and month, and there's only one fact table, the physical table in the warehouse, which is project data. Looking down at the passes of SQL, the first pass of SQL does a count of project ID referencing forecast launch. This is referencing the first alias table. The second pass of SQL does a count of project ID, but does a count based upon actual launch. This is referencing the second alias table. The third pass of SQL brings these two passes together and then groups it by project manager. And there you have it. Hopefully you have now seen there are two different ways of answering the same question, both using alias tables, one that can be done by a business user and one that can be done by an administrator in MicroStrategy. Oh, and before I forget, please click like on this video, and if I win a reward, I will buy you a virtual beer. Thanks, goodbye.